The SBA, Pentagon, and Treasury are running simultaneous audits of the 8A program, each targeting different risks, but all aimed at restoring integrity to a system the administration says has been widely misused. The scale of the oversight is something the contracting community hasn't seen before. We'll explore what ties these reviews together and what contractors might expect with Emily Murphy, Senior Fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting and former GSA Administrator. Emily, great to have you on the show.
Wonderful to be here. Happy New Year, Terry.
Thank you, and you too. Let's start our new year by digging into what's happening with the 8A program. It is probably under the tightest scrutiny in its 47-year history. Why does this administration care so much? What are they looking for?
I think that there are a few things that have converged right now and that have sort of put 8A in the spotlight. And part of it is actually what the Biden administration did with the 8A program. Which, if you remember, there's a statutory goal that says 5% of prime contract dollars are supposed to be awarded to small, socially and economically disadvantaged businesses. And 8A is the primary tool for making those awards. But President Biden, via executive order and some memos out of OMB, raised that goal to 15%, which brought a lot more money into the program, brought a lot more interest and scrutiny into the program, and led to the first of the lawsuits that we'd seen in, serious lawsuits we'd seen in about 20 years since post-Adirond about the 8A program. There was the Ultima case that was decided in 23 that said SBA could no longer presume certain categories were socially disadvantaged. So that sort of led to people starting to look at the 8A program and it put things in flux. The other thing actually goes back maybe about 10 years further, which was Congress back in 2013, 2014, looked at limitation on subcontracting. And how did you make sure, not just in the 8A program, but in all the socioeconomic programs, that if you were giving work, setting aside work to a type of companies, the work was actually being done by those companies. And the old rules always said that 51% of the cost of the labor or 51% of the cost of the goods had to be done by the small business getting the award. 8A, woman-owned, HUBZone, service-able veteran. But it was really hard to figure out if anyone was following that because small businesses don't usually engage in cost accounting. They certainly don't have the cost basis of their subcontractors to figure it out. So you never could really figure out whether anyone was complying. It created weird requirements for small businesses that we were hoping would grow into large businesses, where it said, just you're better off not teaming with anyone, just go it alone because you're not going to get in trouble. But then as soon as you become a large business or an other than small business, we want you to start contracting with other small businesses. So Congress came in and said, all right, rather than this 51% of cost basis, we're just going to look at the dollars that are awarded to the company. And we're going to start saying that 50% of the dollars that are awarded to a company under any contract may be subcontracted to companies that are not similarly situated. So if award went to a small business, they and other small businesses had to keep 50% of the dollars. And then they could use non-small businesses to do the remaining 50% of the work. They could work with other 8As to meet that 50% goal, and then the remaining 50%, they could use small businesses or women-owned small businesses or large businesses. But the plan was then to use the electronic subcontracting reporting system to track that and see whether or not that was being complied with. That hasn't happened. But the changes, and it took a while to get the regulations in place to implement those, have now given us some insight into how subcontracting is. It's made it much more easy to audit whether or not all small businesses, but in this case, 8As, are following those rules. And there was the O'Keefe Media Group where they caught one company on saying that they were subcontracting more than I think they were allowed to under the program. So you had these changes of the goals, which President Trump rolled back very beginning of January of 2025. But that didn't change the fact that a lot of new money had come into the program. And so the program was going to get a lot more scrutiny. This sort of led us to where we are now.
Well, the Pentagon has just announced that they're going to conduct their own line-by-line review. What does the administration hope to learn separately from the SBA investigation by the DOD? Taking a deep dive.
When I read the secretary's or saw the secretary's announcement on that, I thought it was interesting that he was making two different points. The first one was he wanted to make sure that all the contracts that were being awarded using the 8A program were following limitation on subcontracting. But he said that they were really going to focus on those that were above $20 million. Now, sole source contracts above $20 million don't go to just your average 8A company. There's a cap on sole source awards, and it depends on whether it's for goods or services, but it's less than half of that amount. The only companies getting $20 million sole source awards through the 8A program are Alaska Native corporations, Native Hawaiian organizations, tribally owned organizations that don't have the same affiliation restrictions that traditional 8As have, don't have the same management restrictions. So it's a special subclass of 8As. And they said that when they focused on those above $20 million, I thought it was interesting that they seemed to be looking at the larger 8A companies, the ones that have taken on more and more of this work.
Should we read anything particular into that focus?
I would think that was the distinction I saw between the general 8A reviews taking place at SBA, the reviews that were put out, or requests for review that were put out by Senator Ernst in Senate Small Business, and the work that was happening at the Pentagon. I also thought it was interesting the Pentagon said the other thing they wanted to do was make sure that these contracts were for things that align with their priorities. Now, that's always a good thing to do. You don't want to be spending money on things that don't align with your priorities. But I thought it was an interesting take from the Secretary's announcement that the contracts that he was focusing on were those that were tribal organization-owned 8A companies.
I'm speaking with Emily Murphy. She's Senior Fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting and a former GSA Administrator. Emily, let's turn to the other agency that's digging into the 8As, Treasury. They're looking at $9 billion of performance-based contracts. Where does that fit in this puzzle?
So the Treasury is looking at similar issues with task orders and others issued under the 8A program to whether or not they met the requirements, but also it's also getting into limitation on subcontracting, so you're seeing similar trends across all of the investigations. Where the Secretary of War was talking about Beltway bandits, and Administrator Loeffler was talking instead about just looking at all 4,000 plus 8As. Treasury is looking specifically at those that they awarded, and that's a good place to start for them to make sure that they're actually meeting, once again, that you're not having what they're calling a pass-through. Now, one thing I do think is interesting is that this is all focused only on the 8A program, where the pass-through issue exists for all small business contracts. And so if I were a small business, I'd be making sure that any work that I'm doing, I wouldn't assume that this is going to stop with the 8A companies. I think that the 8As, because of that 15% goal in the prior administration, are getting a lot of focus. But I would be concerned if I were another small business to make sure that I was documenting that I was following limitation on subcontracting.
Let's dig into that a little bit, because all of this activity collectively has sort of raised the level of angst among the government contracting community. If you were a legitimate small business 8A provider, what should you expect as these reforms move forward?
So if you're following the rules, this shouldn't itself be a fundamental challenge, with two caveats on that. The first one being pause in the work and awards made to any 8A is going to change your pipeline and whether or not you're able to exist. So if your pipeline was based on sole source awards, of $4 million, $5 million, and there is a freeze on awards, that's going to put you in a more difficult spot in terms of, does the agency that was going to make the award have the capacity to go out and run a competition? Will they do it as an 8A set aside rather than as a sole source? Does it need to be removed from the 8A program first in order for that to happen? So there's some contracting challenges that go with that. The other challenge you've got is that if you look at the model deviation to Part 19 of the FAR that was issued last summer, it changed the basis of award for 8A as well. And it said that if 8A companies are on a multiple award contract, that instead of doing sole sources to those 8As, you should do a competitive award. And that if something has previously been in the 8A program and you want to instead award it to another socioeconomic group, say service-able veterans or women, you no longer need to go to SBA and ask their permission. You can go ahead and do it on your own. So those are the challenges I'd be focused on more if I were an 8A company. that was convinced it was complying with the limitation on subcontracting rules.
And what do you think the administration is anticipating on the other side when they get these investigations complete and they see the results? Are we going to see tighter rules? Are we going to see a new version of the 8A, something completely different?
Well, Congress hasn't really gotten itself involved in the 8A program in decades now. SBA is somewhat constrained as to what it can or cannot change in the program on its own. And there are stakeholders on both sides of the 8A issue in Congress. You've got the ranking member on the House Small Business Committee has been a longtime champion of the 8A program. Senators from states that have a lot of tribal contracting tend to be supportive of the program because it brings work back to the or revenue back to their states and to communities that they consider to be underserved. So, how much flexibility the administration will have to make structural changes to the program, it remains to be seen. And how much collaboration that they're going to get. Are they going to take the results of that investigation and go to Congress and ask for changes? Or are they just going to change the practice of how they use the tools? Because again, there's a 5% goal for awarding contracts to socially and economically disadvantaged companies owned by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. But there is no mandate that you must use the 8A program to do that. Does the administration then decide by administrative practice that they're going to pull back and they're going to find other ways of meeting that goal?
Well, there's certainly going to be a lot to watch. Emily, thanks for your insight.
Thank you. It's a fun topic to be exploring and to be watching right now.
So much to watch. Emily Murphy is a senior fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting and a former GSA administrator. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.